The very important was a transition from the mechanical equipment to electronic one. And I would like to mention the efforts of Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. Actually, Thomas Edison had more than 1,000 patents during his life, and he was absolutely a genius that forced and have implemented and actually influenced the future generations of computers that were based on electricity. And it is not questionable that the forefather for all of the electronic computers that we know today was ENIAC, electronic numeric integrator and calculator, that was invented between 1943 and 1945 by John Mauchly and Presper Eckert. They got funding from the Army Department because they proposed to make calculations for the artillery tables, and it was really necessary during the wartime to make their artillery more accurate. That is why Army granted $500,000 to Eckert and Mauchly to build their device for computations. They claimed that they could produce all of those tables with no errors at all, and to eliminate so named computers as employee, predominantly females, and make the computations automatic. And the fact was that ENIAC, the initial design of ENIAC, required 18,000 vacuum tubes. It is a tremendous number. For example, after 20 years of the initial creation of ENIAC, even the most complicated equipment, electronic organ, had only 160 vacuum tubes. An ordinary television set had only 30 vacuum tubes, and vacuum tubes were not stable elements and they constantly fail. That is why it was very difficult to construct such a big equipment consist of 18,000 vacuum tubes. And they very soon found that they could not hire experienced employee within their university because they didn't believe in the feasibility of creating such an equipment. And they could only hire a very young specialist who have never understood what they did. And when they first succeeded with their experiment, they actually ran to bring evidences to the calculation that was made for their first iteration. And it was an employee, a computer, a woman actually, that was astounded that so many elements were required to make such a simple computation, a multiplication of 5 to 1,000. For her it was ridiculous, but the initial intention led to the fact that ENIAC could make a computation in 20 seconds that required more than 42 hours of an older machine Mark I that was equipped with gears and shuffles. And the first problem that was intended to be solved by ENIAC, due to the fact that the Second World War was already finished, was the feasibility of an hydraulic bomb. And the first experiment was that ENIAC have solved the problem for 20 seconds that required more than 2 weeks of mechanical computations to check if ENIAC was wrong or right. And after this experiment, they actually make a salvation of a problem: was the hydraulic bomb feasible or not? And they made no favor for humanity by solving this equation. After chewing more than 500,000 punched cards, and ENIAC have produced the answer that a hydraulic bomb can be created. ENIAC was a very complicated computing machine. It was a size of 30 by 60 meters and with a weight of more than 30 tons. And to maintain such an equipment was a big challenge. And Mauchly and Eckert actually produced a very good job. Eckert, to test all of the tubes, applied different tools and tricks. Actually, he used a lower voltage to keep them work longer, and all the wires he tested by rats. So he kept them hungry for a long period and then drop the different wire cables to test by the rats and choose those cables that was not very tasty for rats. So Mauchly and Eckert tried to build this machine in time, and typically they spent all 24 hours on work and ate all 3 meals at once. And another problem of ENIAC was that it was very difficult to reprogram this equipment. To make ENIAC to produce a different kind of computations required to reconnect all of the wires and actually reconfigure all of the gears that were placed on the another side of this equipment. And for nowadays, to make a computation, a multiplication of p by a number required to reconnect the reconnection of all of the wires of ENIAC and reconfiguration of all of the gears and putting one particular gears at the position 3, 1, and 4. And this problem was one of the greatest problems that they would like to overcome. And they teamed with a genius of that time, John von Neumann, who was one of the men who joined the team of an atomic bomb creation. And now von Neumann helped them to produce another kind of machines that could make computations according to the electrical signals. And they together created another form of machines like EDVAC and UNIVAC, and that could actually be reprogrammed by no need of reconfiguration of wires and gears. But during their work with John von Neumann, they were not very happy that a lot of achievements were assigned to John von Neumann, and they left their university to create their own company and to create their own kind of computing machines. And such a kind was the UNIVAC. And actually they have solved some number of UNIVACs to the Census Bureau, but Mauchly and Eckert was never successful anymore, and their company went to bankruptcy because at that time international business machines, they absolutely monopolized the market and they sold much more equipment comparing to their company. John von Neumann actually was a real genius. At the age of 6, he could tell stories in native Greek language, and once upon a time he could solve a complicated problem that required another professor to use a hand pocket calculator just in mind. And John von Neumann is absolutely one of the men who is famous for the way to detonate an atomic bomb. So he was the one who invented the way how to create this atomic bomb feasible.